My name is Jane D. Nichols, and I am the Assistant Vice President of Community Affairs for the Asian Pacific American Bar Association DC chapter, or APABA120111. It is certainly an honor to come before you today and present and share with you a significant and poignant part of our history, the Vincent Chin legacy, which has often been thought of as a catalyst for the Asian American civil rights movement. In a few minutes, you'll see a reenactment of the historical civil rights trial of Vincent Chin and its different stages. Before I go any further, on behalf of APABA120111, I want to take this time to acknowledge and thank Judge Mott for giving us this very unique opportunity to present this historical trial to you. We are truly grateful and honored to be here. We'd also like to thank Chief Judge Satterfield, and we wish him a speedy recovery, the Superior Court staff for hosting this event and making diversity an important part of the court's mission. As many of you may already be familiar with this case, please allow me to provide a very brief backdrop. In June of 1982, Vincent Chin, a Chinese-American Detroit native, was beaten to death by Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz. Nitz and Evans did not serve a day in prison initially and was later sentenced in state court to 3 years of probation with some fines and court costs. Later, Evans's federal conviction on a civil rights violation was overturned on appeal. The verdicts and lack of justice for the murder of Vincent Chin caused extreme shock and outrage within the Asian American community. As you'll see, this case drew much public attention to the rising tide of anti-Asian violence. Chin's legacy lives on as it fueled a new wave of Pan-Asian organization, which began at the local level and has expanded nationally. From the perspective of the judiciary, the Vincent Chin case became an example of problems in the criminal justice system, and the case had a lasting impact on a number of areas of law, from civil rights to sentencing guidelines, victims' rights, and the responsibilities of the prosecution. The Chin case is a reminder of the impact that a single legal case can have on a minority community, the courts, and the country. The Vincent Chin case represents a significant milestone in the APA community's quest for equality and access to justice. As you may know, Asian Americans have been subject to hate crimes and legal and de facto discrimination since they arrived on the shores of this country. There were lynchings in the 1870s and numerous cases of Asians being run out of towns simply because they were considered different. There is also the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Even to this day, discrimination continues, particularly to persons of South Asian descent. Considering the history, progress has been made through organizing, networking, lobbying, and pushing changes in the justice system. APABA120111 is one such example of the progress that has been made since the early 1980s, which is the time frame when the Vincent Chin murder occurred, with respect to Asian Americans organizing for justice and having a voice. A primary component of APABA120111's mission is to cultivate an understanding of the issues facing the APA legal community and the APA community at large by being a voice in the Washington, D.C. area, and by serving as a resource for governmental agencies, members of Congress and their staff, and public service organizations. Asian Americans are still facing issues today, and though we see progress, there are barriers to access of justice for Asian Americans or Asians who are living in the United States. Later in the presentation, EEOC Commissioner Stuart Ishimaru will touch upon this in his remarks following the historical trial presentation. Okay, with that said, without further ado, I'd like to present to you the reenactment of the historical trial of Vincent Chin. In making this possible, We have an all-star cast of attorney actors on both sides of me and in the front row from APABA DC and DOJ Pan Asia, whose dedication brings them here today. So thank you very much for your indulgence.
Morning, everyone. My name is Ellen Lee, and this is Chris Chan, and we'll be your narrators today. So this much is certain. On June 19, 1982, just outside Detroit, Vincent Chen, 27 years old, of Chinese ancestry, a working-class American citizen, engaged to be married the following week, went out with his friends for a bachelor party. At a strip club, they encountered two men, Ronald Evans and his stepson, Michael Nitz. There was an altercation. It continued outside. Sometime later, and a few blocks away, Nitz held Chen down as Evans swung a baseball bat. The bridegroom's head was split open. Blood, spinal fluid, and cerebral matter pooled onto the pavement beneath him, and he collapsed into a coma. Chen died 4 days later. In state court, Evans and Nitz faced criminal charges. They accepted a plea bargain. At the sentencing, the prosecutors did not appear. Judge Charles Kaufman imposed on each man 3 years probation, a $3,000 fine, and court costs. Everything else is disputed. There would be 2 federal criminal trials, a protest movement, and more publicity than have ever been devoted to any incident involving an Asian American. Yet the context, the causes, the consequences of the Vincent Chen case all have been the subject of great controversy. Although the Vincent Chen case has ceased to be infamous, for Asian Americans it has never stopped being iconic.
The Vincent Chen case is very much a part of our legacy as Asian Americans. This morning we'll explore the legacy by reenacting portions of court proceedings for you, drawing from transcripts and court decisions, and the words you hear are actual words with minor editing for length. We'll start with the state court sentencing.
We begin with the sentencing in Wayne County Circuit Court on March 16, 1983. Evans and Nitz were charged with 2nd-degree murder, but the prosecutors offered a plea bargain to manslaughter. Both men accepted, with Evans pleading guilty and Nitz no contest. At sentencing, both men were represented by counsel. As was common at the time because of the high volume of cases and lack of resources in Wayne County, no prosecutor appeared. Nor were the victim's family and friends notified. Defense lawyer Bruce Saperstein spoke on behalf of Evans and argued that Chen was the instigator.
Judge, but for the physical assault by the victim in this case, the victim initiating the physical assault, this crime would have never been committed. Mr. Evans and Mr. Nitz were seated, and the victim walked up and punched Mr. Evans right in the mouth. During the scuffle, Mr. Nitz had his head cut open and was bleeding profusely and, in fact, required stitches. Either side, Your Honor, could have been the victim in this case. They could have changed places in this particular case. I think Your Honor would agree in looking at the background that the background of Mr. Evans is impeccable. Mr. Evans is not a heinous criminal. I don't believe that even rehabilitation is called for in this case. I'm confident, Judge, that this would never happen again. And God knows that these gentlemen would like to see this man back. But we can't change what happened here. With respect to punishment, Judge, Mr. Evans is being punished every day of his life over this incident. We can't change that. He has to live with this. His work background is excellent, Judge. 17 years at Chrysler.
Mr. Evans, do you wish to say something?
Only that I'm deeply sorry about what happened. If there's any way I could change this, I sure would.
I was looking to see if there was any background on the victim. Do you have any background on him? Did the victim have a criminal record?
Judge, I don't have any background on him either way.
It's the judgment of this court that each of the defendants be placed on probation for a period of 3 years. In addition, I will require that each of you pay $260 a year costs at the rate of $25 per month. That each of you pay an additional fine in the amount of $3,000 at the rate of $100 per month. I will leave the question of restitution to civil proceedings.
Judge Kaufman did not explain his reasoning for imposing a sentence of probation, but months later in an interview he stated that
These weren't the kind of men you send to jail. You don't make the punishment fit the crime. You make the punishment fit the criminal.
We now turn to the community reaction. Traditionally, the Asian American community did not make waves, and Asian Americans had been reluctant to discuss race. Asian Americans did not know the language of civil rights, and in the early 1980s, the subject of race was largely black and white. The Asian American community, however, was galvanized by the notion that a Chinese American could be beaten to death because of his race, with his killers sentenced only to probation and a fine. The two men were white auto workers in Detroit. One was out of work at a time when the U.S. auto industry was under tremendous pressure from Japanese imports. Detroit in 1982 was perhaps the hardest place in America to be Asian American at the time. Asians were the face of the enemy. Anti-Japanese sentiment was at its height. There was taunting, violence, and public displays, including scenes of politicians and union leaders demolishing Japanese imports. That Jap crowd with hammers.
it was against this setting that Asian Americans found cause to speak up. For the first time, Asian Americans crossed ethnic and socioeconomic lines to join together to seek justice for Vincent Chin. Led by, among others, attorney Liza Chan, journalist Helen Zia, and Vincent's mother, Lily Chin, a number of Asian Americans formed American Citizens for Justice. Their efforts to publicize the case were remarkably successful. The extensive publicity was virtually unanimous in its criticism of the sentence, the judge, the prosecutors, and the two defendants. This case was described as an outrage, the product of racism. We will now turn to the federal prosecution.
Well, in June 1983, Liza Chan, Lily Chin, and others met with the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. to urge the government to bring federal criminal civil rights charges against Evans and Nitz. Because of ACJ's efforts, the Justice Department received thousands of letters and signatures on petitions urging it to prosecute Evans and Nitz. In November 1983, a federal grand jury in Detroit indicted Evans and Nitz for interfering with Chin's right to use and enjoy a place of public accommodation, the Fancy Pants Lounge, on account of his race, and conspiracy to do the same. The case was assigned to Judge Anna Diggs Taylor, one of the first African-American women to be appointed to any federal court in the country. The case was extensively litigated with numerous pretrial motions, including a motion to dismiss the indictment on the grounds the federal civil rights law in question applied only to blacks and that Orientals were considered by many to be white and were not protected. There was also a motion to change venue because of the adverse pretrial publicity. Both motions were denied.
Trial commenced on June 5th, 1984. It was undisputed that Evans and Nitz killed Vincent Chin, but there was a sharp dispute over the issue of motivation. The government had to prove Evans and Nitz acted because of Chin's race. We now turn to the opening statements from the United States versus Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz, the first of the two federal trials. Theodore Merritt from the Justice Department opened for the government, while defense attorney David Lawson spoke for Evans.
May it please the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show that on June 19th, 1982, a brutal crime was committed on the streets in Highland Park. On that night, the defendant, Ronald Evans, helped by his co-defendant, Michael Nitz, repeatedly beat with a baseball bat a Chinese American citizen of the United States by the name of Vincent Chin.